Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and I love to talk about books. And today, a bit belatedly, I'm going to be wrapping up and ranking the fiction books that I read for the semi-finals of the Booktube Prize. So yeah, I'm about 2 weeks late with this and I'm aware I didn't post last week. I took my kids away camping for the last week of the school holidays and thought I would film this video on location. I often have ideas that are like up here and my ability to pull them off is down here. I still haven't made this distinction in my head. So yeah, the video didn't get made, but we had a great time camping. We were over in St Andrews. The weather was roasting. It was like being in the med. So yeah, it was a great trip that we had. And then my youngest started school this week. So it's been a bit hectic, but I finally got my thoughts together on these books and I didn't want to not talk about them even though it's late. So I guess this is kind of, you know, it's still a wrap up. I'm still talking about some really great books and I hope from this pile that you will find ones that you might want to pick up as well. So I'm going to start with my 6th rated book and work my way up to first, and I'll talk about whether my fellow judges agreed with me and whether these books made it through to the final. The book I put in 6th place was The Promise by Damon Galgut. So I read J.M. Coetzee's Disgrace last year and I didn't know how to feel about it. I'm pretty sure I hated most of it, but I at least came away from it knowing that I had to read more about South Africa. So this book came along at just the right time because it focuses on a South African family, the Swarts, and kind of charts the disintegration of that family. On her deathbed, the mother of the family asks her husband to make her a promise that he will allow their long-term servant Salom to officially own the shack on their land in which she has always lived. As the children, Amor and her siblings, grow up, they grow more detached from the family, particularly Amor, as she watches this promise go unfulfilled. In turn, you know, for other reasons as well, the family splinters and crumbles. The younger generation grow increasingly alienated from what it is the older generation stands for. And this book spans decades, but it's quite sparse in terms of plot. Like, it's not a long read, but that doesn't mean that it lacks in depth. Because with the switching narratives and there are leaps in time, the shifts in the characters' lives and stances are really palpable. I think Galgut is just a really spare writer, but he's careful with it. So he's able to convey in really succinct prose what some authors would take, you know, like 10 times the words to do. And whilst this is a family story, it's also kind of an allegory for South Africa at the time where apartheid, at least nominally, came to an end, but tensions and inequalities persisted. You know, I don't know enough about that period in history, so I'm not sure I grasped all the subtleties of the points being made, but I still felt that this book had an impact. So I don't think, you know, this didn't rank higher, is that kind of pretty much like the cover. It lacked colour. I didn't feel as strongly as I had thought I would feel reading the story. Something just felt a bit disconnected and distant. I can't really explain it, but that gap was what kept this book in the good category rather than the great category for me. And I suppose other judges must have felt similarly because this has not moved through to the final. In 5th place, I put The Sentence by Louise Erdrich, which is the first of her books that I've read. She has been on my radar, and then when I heard that this one was set in a bookshop, I knew I finally had to get to her. What I wasn't expecting with this book is that it opens with the main character stealing a dead body. And that main character is Tuki. She then goes on to spend a long period of time in prison, but we meet her after that, and you know, she's since found a way to have a more settled life. She's in a relationship with the tribal police officer that arrested her, and she has a job in the local indigenous bookshop. But her life is disrupted by the return of her stepdaughter and by the death of a a regular customer of the bookshop who decides to spend their afterlife haunting Tukey at work. Then both the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd cause further, disruption, fear, and uncertainty in the city and in Tukey's life. And she's battling with feelings and memories whilst also trying to hold things together for those around her. And in the process, she considers books and identity, social injustice, and the dynamics and importance of family. And I enjoyed this book a lot. I think Tukey is a fantastic character. She's funny and snarky, but she has this like warmth that radiates, even though her experiences could have left her being very bitter and cold. And she isn't perfect. She's got her raw edges, but she feels very genuine. She feels like someone that I was, happy to root for and wanted the best for. I really enjoyed her voice a lot, particularly when it came to her feelings around her stepdaughter and the haunting experiences in the bookshop. I'm not sure how I felt about the inclusion of the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd. I felt that their inclusion and the impact that they had on the story was important, and I certainly didn't feel them to be like, I think I've heard other people say that their inclusion is quite jarring, and I didn't find that. I think for me, probably it's just still too close to both those incidences to have them appear in fiction yet. Erdrich uses them to make salient points, and they do fit with the narrative well enough not to feel kind of shoehorned in. But I felt having the real world breaking into Tukey's story pulled me out of it a little bit, and I'm left wondering what would her story have been without including those in the book. And maybe that's why, maybe other people felt the same, because again, this book has not made it through to the final. In fourth place, I have The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois by Honorée, Fanonne, Jeffers. I always struggle when authors have more than one name. But in hindsight, this actually, I would have ranked this like in the second or third place. I think I needed a little bit of time to let it settle with me, which I didn't have before I had to submit my rankings. Because there is a lot to take in with this book. It's over 800 pages long, and it covers the history of a family from the slave trade up to the modern day. But in that, we also get the history of the lands, the indigenous people, other people that were on the plantations, and the impact of the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement. Central to the story is Elif Pearl Garfield as she comes of age. So we see her through school and college as she becomes more aware of her family's history and contends with things in her own life. The story and the histories are told both through Elif's perspective and what she uncovers in her studies, and also in sections narrated by this kind of ancestral voice. And then actually there's other portions that are focused on members of Elif's immediate family that are told in third person. And it took me a while to warm up to this book. Initially, the ancestral sections, they throw out a lot of place and people names, and I struggled to follow those threads. But as I grew to know Elif and her family and understand where those ancestral voices fitted in and were taking me, I really did start to enjoy this book. This is like definitely a novel that requires persistence, because you don't often see where a thread is taking you before things then change direction, and it's only later when that thread reappears that you can see how to untangle that particular theme or character or point being made. But I honestly think it pays off in the end, and I really do think this is a novel that you should persist with. As maybe as is to be anticipated, this book isn't always an easy read. There's brutality, there's rape and assault, there's lynching, there's racism, colorism, drug addiction, child abuse. Like, I'm probably forgetting something. There's so much misery and pain in this book, but Rising above that, there's also so much love, you know, whether that be between Ailey and her uncle Root, which I loved that relationship, or through the use of food or sharing stories. There's such a warmth at the core of this book, which sometimes can make the bad stuff worse to read, but more often than not, it's just really touching. And this is the sort of book that just blows my mind simply for the work that must have gone into it. The detail is staggering, not to mention the way that the author handles all of those bloody threads without them just becoming this big twisted, knotted ball of mess. And so then the fact that it is presented in such gorgeous prose is really like the cherry on the top. So yeah, I ranked this 4th, and I do regret that now, but thankfully that doesn't matter because clearly my fellow judges are much better than me at seeing the book's worth, and it has moved through to the finals. In 3rd place, I had Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead, and I'll be honest, I was not enthusiastic about the prospect of reading a book centred around a female pilot from the early half of the 20th century. It's just not my usual thing. I'm not interested in aeroplanes or trains or cars or boats or spaceships or, you know, anything like that for that matter. And given it is a chunker of a book, I was dragging my heels a bit with this one. But within the first few chapters, I was able to put that kind of prejudice aside and even found myself coming to really enjoy the descriptions of flight as the book went on. So yeah, this is a book about a female pilot who attempts to fly a great circle around the globe, so kind of through the poles in the 1950s, but it's so much more than that. For a start, there's 2 timelines. So Marion Graves, who is the pilot, and there's her timeline of learning to fly, embarking on her quest, but then there's also a modern day story of an actress called Hadley, who's trying to redeem her reputation by playing Marianne in a biopic or biopic, I never know how to pronounce that, a movie of Marianne's life. But Marianne's story in particular is humongous. It encompasses those of like her twin brother and her uncle and her best friend, her shady benefactor, her lover, her navigator, and about a million other characters. This book is epic. It's a saga. It's a whole lot. And as maybe is predictable in such a sprawling story, there are pieces that work and there are pieces that maybe don't. In general, I felt Hadley's story was a bit of a distraction because like Hadley and the other people in the world that she inhabits, they're just not interesting or relatable. That storyline only really became integral in the last quarter of the book, so it did turn out to be necessary, but I did find those chapters far less compelling than Marianne's ones. But thankfully, like this book is so heavy. Marianne's part of the story gets a lot more page time than Hadley's, and I thought Marianne was a fascinating character. She's strong and very deliberate. She's quite stubborn, but she does have vulnerabilities and faces challenges that make her still a sympathetic character. And the other characters that play varying parts in her story are also really interesting. And I felt that their plot lines added a real richness to the story. And also, like another layer of that richness was there are so many themes woven into this book. There's class and family and female autonomy, coercive control, sexual identity, family trauma, art. Some are executed better than others, but pretty much all of them had a reason for being part of the story. So I was very pleasantly surprised by how much I liked this book. I think its length does do it a disservice, more so for this than the love songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, because with this one I certainly did feel like I was ploughing through at parts of the book, but then I don't really know what could have been cutting out without damaging the kind of bigger picture of the story. So yeah, Shipstead's definitely a writer I could read again, which is handy because I think it's a short story collection of hers as a net galley. So yeah, I rated this third, and my fellow judges agreed, and this is moving forward to the final. My second place book was Elif Shafak's The Island of Missing Trees, and I've been wanting to read this author for quite a while, just haven't got to it. TBR problems. I have 10 minutes and 38 seconds in This Strange World sitting on my shelf, and I haven't got to it yet. So like when I was assigned this for the Booktube Prize, I was very excited anyway. But then when Scott over at Comparative Fiction and Plot, he said to me that he didn't think this was as good as 10 minutes. So then I was actually more excited because I was glad to be reading this one first. I hate peaking too soon with an author. So this book is simultaneously about a teenage girl in London, her Cypriot parents, and the history of Cyprus, and a tree, a fig tree, that can talk, at least to us readers. So Ada is 16 and her mother has recently died, and following something of a breakdown in front of her classmates, she's left feeling embarrassed and confused, and licking her wounds over the period of the school holidays when her aunt, who is her mother's estranged sister, comes to stay. And Ada is pretty hostile to her. She doesn't want the company of this woman who, you know, has never played a part in her life, didn't come to her mother's funeral. And then we have Costas and Daphne, who meet in Cyprus at the time of the conflict on the island during the 1970s. They're on opposite sides of the Greek-Turkish Cypriot divide, so their relationship has to remain a secret, and they meet in this taverna in order to see each other. And in this taverna there is a fig tree growing through it, and this tree witnesses their love and the tragedies that befall the customers who sit under its branches. In Ada's lifetime, a fig tree has grown in the garden of her house, and it's a cutting from this tree from the taverna. And the tree speaks to us, giving voice to both the history of Cyprus and the immigrant experience. And I think two of my favourite aspects of this book were the historical look at Cyprus and the really strong sense of place that there is in parts of this story. I had no idea about the history of Cyprus. You know, either the conflict itself or the sad shadow from it that still remains. And I fell in love with the setting through Shafak's writing. She really evokes the beauty of the place, and even in the devastation there is a sense of this, you know, being a love song to the country. And with those aspects, I really enjoyed the story of Daphne and Costas, and really felt for them as the situation threw like huge boulders in their path. But I think it took me a little longer to find connection with Ada's story. But as things progressed, I really did appreciate the look at how cultural, the kind of cultural aspect of nature nurture can shape a person, and also that issue of inherited pain, inherited trauma. I will admit I wasn't crazy about the tree. I really liked it as a device, you know, fleshing out aspects of the story and the history, but I didn't always gel with its voice. And while I really love beautiful nature writing, this book has helped me see that, at least in my mind, there is a distinction between descriptive nature writing and botanical, like, factualism. And it turns out I'm not hugely interested in the botanical factualism. I think the tree narrative, it does elevate this book, but at the same time I do think it could have had less of a presence. But that really is a minor criticism, as overall I really did enjoy my reading experience. Shafak is a stunning writer who, you know, she's able to keep many moving parts going whilst building up the story, and this book has just made me more excited to read her other books now that I have read this. So yeah, I ranked this second, my fellow judges agreed, and so this book has moved on to the final, which means my first place book didn't make it into the finals, which is a fucking travesty. I'm absolutely gutted. Even though I can completely understand So many of these books are great. And Robert Sheard, who runs the Booktube Prize, did say that my favourite book came fourth, and it was a very, very close run thing. But my heart still really hurts that Unsettled Ground by Claire Fuller did not make it into the finals, because this, even, you know, I've read these other books more recently, more fresher. This one was still my favourite. This is the story of 50-ish-year-old twins, Jeannie and Julius. They live with their mother, Dot, in this kind of ramshackle, dilapidated small holding. Jeannie was diagnosed with a heart condition when she was young, and so she has lived most of her life within the boundaries of the family home. And whilst he's had more life experience, Julius has really remained loyal to the women in his life since his father died. When Dot dies, the twins find the walls of their existence pulled down by outside forces, and the secrets that their mother kept from them keep creeping out of that rubble. Their story is one of abject poverty, social isolation, and bonds being tested. You know, what does it mean to be an outcast, even from your own history? So this book is bleak, but it's incredibly powerful. Jeannie is such a special character. My heart was with her at every punch life threw at her. And I was just so impressed how she's got really scant resources, but she's able to pull and keep trudging forward. And just when she thinks she's hit rock bottom, there's further to fall, and my heart broke for her. And she's not the only really fully realized character in this. Fuller is really good at creating characters, no matter how long they're with you through the story. She's also really great at ranking up the tension. This book builds and builds, and by the height of the drama, I was, pretty tense myself. So in that way, the story does pull you through. You're not swamped down by the bleakness. And I think also there's wit in this book as well, particularly Jeannie's observations of the people around her. It's not an easy read, but I think it's a really rewarding one, and it shows a side of British life, or specifically English life, that doesn't get a lot of attention. When we think of poverty in the UK, it's often about like inner cities and things like this, but this is a case of rural poverty, which is something in my area of the country and my work I've been made really aware of. And the importance of literacy and all these sorts of things that are brought up in this book, and I just think it's fantastic. And I'm really, really annoyed it didn't make it through to the final, because you should still read it. So them's the books. I am judging the final for translated fiction, which I think all 6 books are new to me books, because I haven't read translated fiction since the octafinals, the very first round. So I don't think any of the books that I started with have made it through to the final, so I've got some reading ahead of me. I would go through them now, but I'm really unprepared for this video. There's some hits. There's The Anomaly, The Art of Losing. I've also got The Brickmakers. I can't even remember the titles of the other ones. What have we got? I'll put the names of the other ones on the screen because I can't remember. So that will be me read and judged all of the rounds of the Booktube Prize this year, which is not something I've managed before. Whether I'll do it next year, I don't know. We'll see. But the finals end at the end of September, so the winners of the Booktube Prize are announced in October, and that is when I will do my final rating and ranking video talking about my experience of those books. I might do it as a vlog style because I haven't started any of them yet, but we'll see. So let me know your thoughts. Have you judged any rounds of the Booktube Prize? Have you read any of these books, whether that was for the Booktube Prize or not? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to know what your take on all of them is, or your take on the Booktube Prize. And until next time.